Hi again. Welcome to the fourth lecture in this series, introducing some topics on artificial intelligence and the ethics of AI. This lecture is going to cover what's known as generative AI, and we're going to consider how generative AI might change society as we currently understand it. So let's get right into things. The first thing that we need to do is try to define what exactly we mean by generative AI. Well, here's the definition that's offered by IBM's website. So this is probably a good definition to go with. According to IBM, generative AI refers to deep learning models that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on the data that they were trained on. Now, what we need to pay attention to here is what exactly is meant by content. Really, content can refer to any information at all, anything that can be generated in some sense based upon what is already present online. So if there's an image of a dog online, then AI can generate a brand new image based upon that data. And so content here would be the image of the dog. So anything, any kind of information at all, really is what we're referring to. And if you're interested in other ways to think about generative AI, there's a link here that I'll provide. Again, this is just the IBM website on how to define generative AI. But of course, this definition is leaving out quite a bit. There are aspects that are not quite clear, so we need to think more in more detail what exactly this means. The approach to defining generative AI that I favor is an ostensive definition, one where we basically point towards examples. We point towards things that generative AI produces, the product of generative AI. So if we can demonstrate that something has been made or created by some generative AI program, then that will help us understand what it is that it does, what its function is. So let's consider some examples. Here are several different images that are an amazingly high quality detail. They look like they're photographs. On the left, we've got several landscapes of the trees and mountains, and they're quite picturesque. And on the right, we have what looks like it could be somebody's graduation pictures or some sort of a glamour shots, or maybe something that you would find in a magazine. What's interesting about these examples is that none of them exist. That tree doesn't exist. That mountain doesn't exist. That rock doesn't exist. Those four images on the right of people don't exist. None of this exists. It was entirely created by artificial intelligence, but it looks real. It's very, very difficult to tell the difference. And so these help us illustrate the power of generative AI. It can create brand new things that have never been seen before. Of course, it's also sometimes quite easy to tell when something has been created by AI because it will make mistakes. Maybe somebody's eye is not located in the right place, or maybe a mountain is too big compared to where the foreground is. But that's no different than what artists can do. If you think about different artists that are using perspective in ways to try to communicate some idea or some concept, and in doing so, they change the perspective so that it's not realistic. But the general idea, the basic point that I want to get across here is just this idea that examples of generative AI help us understand what it is that we're talking about, what it is that it can do, what its power is. Now, much of what generative AI is able to do is relatively harmless, right? It might help us with all sorts of tasks. It could maybe create grocery lists for us. It might send out emails for us. It might do very routine and repetitive tasks that create what are sometimes known as bottlenecks, where there's a lot of work to be done, a small amount of time, and it's really, really monotonous. This creates a kind of bottleneck in the workforce. And generative AI can help us by doing those tasks for us, which would allow us to go and work on something far more important. So, one way to think about the power of generative AI as a kind of helper is to think of it as a kind of glorified autocorrect. It's there to make our lives a little easier. It's able to help us get our jobs done faster and helps us to be more productive. But there are also aspects of generative AI that are quite problematic, and we're going to want to focus on some of these. For instance, in academic research and articles that are created largely by generative AI, sometimes it's very difficult to tell. Sometimes we use generative AI to help us think about how we want to put together some article or how we want to structure our communication of the research that we're doing. And at what point do we say, well, it's the academic that's producing this versus the AI that's producing it? Indeed, this is a really huge issue. Many journals are struggling to be able to tell when something is plagiarized by a researcher, almost entirely because of generative AI. Indeed, I had a colleague who mentioned to me not too long ago that ChatGPT 4, the free version, roughly about 80% of the people that are using this program are using it in college. These are college students that are using AI essentially to cheat. Some other problematic aspects of this technology are things like art and intellectual property. To what extent are we able to say that a person who is using generative AI to create some painting or some photograph are stealing from somebody else's work? Because remember, they're essentially just pulling information that already exists online somewhere. Some work that somebody has already produced, somebody has already done. Somebody might already own intellectual rights to that artwork. And if somebody is using that to create some new piece of artwork, to what extent is that considered plagiarism or stealing? It's not clear where we're supposed to draw the line. And then what about the news? When we think about news, generally speaking, we're trying to present some information, some story that's happening. But if generative AI can create a brand new story out of whole cloth, maybe something that never even happened, something that doesn't even exist, and we can't tell the difference between a real news story and what's sometimes called fake news, what is that going to do for society and our ability to trust the systems that we rely on and the institutions that make our society function? This raises the problem of misinformation or disinformation. Indeed, this is a major issue for political campaigns. To what extent are we going to allow for people to present misinformation and disinformation as if it's legitimate, newsworthy information all across the internet? And it doesn't even matter if it's fake, because all you have to do is put it out there, and as soon as people see it, it's like the disease has already taken a grip. You've already become infected. It doesn't matter whether somebody fact checks it a few hours later, because it's already spread. It's already gotten its grip on the people, and that's all that's really needed. And then finally, another really important problem that we have to consider, that people are very interested in, is to what extent is generative AI going to replace jobs, replace workers on the workforce? Now, we're not going to be able to talk about each and every one of these in as much detail as I would like, but we are going to try to frame these issues by considering to what extent generative AI is already changing our society. Given that generative AI can create content that is far better than we can currently, and if generative AI can overcome content creation bottlenecks, the sorts that we were talking about a moment ago, where we have routine and redundant tasks that take place every single day in the office, if they're able to do this much faster, more effective than we can now, and at a much cheaper cost than paying a employee, well, then to what extent will that completely disrupt society at large? Now, interestingly, many people have for a long time thought that generative AI are going to replace or take away jobs. The general idea is something like robots are coming for blue collar jobs. In fact, many people thought that it would be blue collar jobs that are going to be lost first. The robots are coming for those jobs before any other jobs. And these are jobs like a police officer or an electrician or a welder, or maybe some form of a repair person, or a plumber. These kind of blue collar jobs, it was originally thought that they were most vulnerable to robots, right? Robots would start doing all of the construction, all of the plumbing, and so on and so forth. Of course, that doesn't mean that the white collar jobs were safe either, but they were a little safer than the blue collar jobs, right? White collar jobs would come next. And these are jobs like your stereotypical accountant or a lawyer, maybe a financial manager of some form. Marketing would certainly be a part of a blue collar job that would be lost. Business managers, physicians, nurses, professors or teachers, and then of course computer programmers, right? It was thought that these were a little safer than blue collar jobs, but eventually AI would come for these jobs too. And it was generally thought that the jobs that would be safe, the jobs that would never really be lost, would be jobs that involve a high level of creativity. These would either be safe, or at least they are safe for now, and the reason why is because AI would never be as creative as human beings are. So, since AI could never do what human beings do as far as creating content, then those jobs would be safe. But that's just false. It turns out that AI is replacing the creative jobs first. Those are the jobs that are actually most vulnerable to being lost. And then, along with the creative jobs, jobs that involve creating content, are white collar jobs. Those jobs are also vulnerable. And it's only the blue collar jobs, like being a plumber or a welder or a construction worker. Those are the jobs that are generally speaking safe. At least safe for now, until we have physical robots that are able to do the manual labor. Of course, many people think that this is an overreaction. It's not really the case that AI are going to replace all of the jobs, not that everybody's going to be out of work. Instead, what we need to do is think about it in terms of creating new jobs that will then replace the old jobs. People that know how to use generative AI will replace those that don't know how to use it. AI, you might think, is going to become mandatory. If you want a good paying job, you'll need to know how to use generative AI. And the same way that people had to learn how to use a computer. If you wanted to get a good paying job, a good white collar job, you needed to know how to use Word or Excel. Still, you might wonder to what extent this is even plausible and what this would actually look like. For example, in the future, are we going to have jobs that involve simply creating a kind of prompt for the AI to respond to, what we might call prompt engineers? It's not quite clear what exactly that would involve. Are the real purpose for AI is to create a whole new kind of job where human beings are interacting with generative AI? Or is the real purpose for generative AI simply to replace all of the jobs? I think this is an open question and one that's worth considering. In fact, there's a really interesting little clip that you can watch if you want, where John Stewart, in a very comedic fashion, takes on this kind of false promise of AI. And here's the link if you want to take a look at that. Okay, so now that we have this general kind of way of thinking about the future of generative AI as it relates to the way society is structured, what I want to do now is consider three specific ways in which artificial intelligence might change society. The first deals with intellectual property and copyright laws. The second is healthcare. And the third is education. So let's take a look at each of these in turn. With regard to intellectual property and copyright laws, we can think about things like music or movies. To what extent is artificial intelligence going to start creating all of our music and all of our movies, all of our entertainment you might say? Consider the most recent actor strike and writer strike that took place during the summer of 2023. They're demanding that they were given guarantees that AI was not going to replace them, that you wouldn't have generative AI writing all of the shows and all of the movies, and that you wouldn't have generative AI actually creating the actors. One of the things that was taking place is many of the extras who are typically paid a very low salary, Oftentimes, they were forced to have a full body scan if they wanted to be employed. And once their full body was scanned, then it was very easy to use that scan to, you know, have them be a part of another commercial or some other movie in the background. I mean, this sort of thing happens all the time with athletes who have their bodies scanned so that way they can then use their image in a video game. Well, once you scanned a person's body, you can use that content for as many video games as you want. You don't have to have them come in and redo it each time you make a new video game. So presumably the same sort of issue might arise with regard to TV shows or movies or literally any other kind of entertainment you might have. And so the actors and writers were demanding that they would have guarantees that the extras would continue to have jobs and would not simply be replaced by the content created by generative AI. But there's other ways we can think about the power of generative AI as it relates to entertainment. Here's one prediction that I think is really quite interesting. Maybe in the future, there'll be a distinction between entertainment that's AI generated and entertainment that's not. So, for instance, you might in the future be able to watch a movie, your favorite movie or your favorite video game, your favorite TV show that has been designed with you in mind. Maybe it turns out that you are the main character of your favorite TV show, or maybe you will be the main character in the next Bond movie. Maybe you'll be the villain in the next Bond movie. Presumably, with artificial intelligence, we can design the entertainment with specifications for exactly what you want, exactly what you enjoy. All that would be needed is for you to consent to having a full body scan and agree to have the relevant companies have access to all the information they might need in order to create your favorite TV show where you're the star. Once we have that, then you can have whatever kind of entertainment might float your boat. Of course, you could argue that even if this is something that takes place in the future, even if this prediction comes to fruition at some point in the future, nonetheless, you might still have old-fashioned movies. You might have old-fashioned books and novels and TV shows. So you might think that entertainment is going to diverge in these two different directions in the future. But what about healthcare? How is generative AI going to affect healthcare? Let's consider this issue. I want you to imagine a world where AI can make a diagnosis better than we can now, make diagnostic advances in a far earlier manner without having a human doctor, right? Maybe in the future you can use AI to cure an illness far sooner and far better than we can. Or maybe it's going to be something as simple as downloading an app for your phone. Imagine a world where you can go to a doctor for some non serious issue, like a mole on your arm, simply by having your phone scan this mole. AI will do all the rest. Doctors don't need to intervene at all. In this sort of world, doctors are free to focus on serious illness rather than mundane, non life threatening medical issues. Now you might think that that's a really nice picture, right? That might be a really interesting and beneficial use of generative AI. You might think that I want to live in that kind of world, or you might be a bit skeptical. You might ask yourself, do I really want to live in that kind of a world? And remember, one of the key things that is a fact about AI, at least our current technology, is that it will straightforwardly lie to you. So on the one hand, it might be really nice to have artificial intelligence tell you whether that mold is a serious issue to be worried about or not. But on the other hand, since it will straightforwardly lie to you, it's not clear we should really trust it to tell us whether that's a cancerous mole or not. And you also might be a bit concerned about how much information you would have to turn over to whatever company owns this product, this artificial intelligence. How much of your private life do you need to give away? How much control of your own autonomous choice would you have to consent to handing over? And what's really interesting about this issue is arguably it's already here, if not right around the corner. And arguably in the future, you're not even going to be able to see a normal doctor, right? You're going to be forced to using your smartphone because maybe it'll be far more expensive to see a doctor. And the cheapest option is for you to just simply download an app onto your phone. So it's not immediately obvious that everyone would want to live in this kind of world. But what about education? Let's consider some of the aspects that are involved with education. Well, currently, a single teacher might have something like 30 students and cannot devote all of the time they would like to devote to each and every one of their students. And some might not even get any attention at all. Unfortunately, this is just an issue that happens in our current educational system. But we could imagine a hypothetical world, one that's not too far away, where students have personalized generative AI instructors, AI that are designed specifically to help educate each student. So we can imagine a world where this AI system learns everything it needs to about you in order to tailor the relevant education and lesson plan specifically to you as a learner, as a student. Whatever way you learn best, it will employ those methods of teaching you. One could argue, and I think quite convincingly, that this could greatly increase overall education levels and success levels, which of course would be a very good thing. You might even think that there's a kind of a moral obligation to pursue this kind of technology for the purpose of better education and more specific education for each student. So, in a future world where AI is used to teach a personalized AI instructor, then many of the worries that we currently deal with in our educational system would be a thing of the past. We can imagine a world where a personalized instructor, AI instructor, is able to provide an education that is superior to any human being and at a fraction of the cost. And then you might think, well, with the savings, we could use that money for more pressing issues like poverty and homeless and numerous other things. So I think it's fair to say that there are clearly many advantages that would come from using generative artificial intelligence. There might be some really wonderful benefits for this sort of world, but it would arguably come at a very high cost. When we consider the kind of systemic, socioeconomic, and racial discrimination that currently exists in our own society, and then imagine what happens when you introduce generative AI into the society, it would probably do more to harm the society than benefit it. Likely, only those who can really afford that kind of education would benefit from it, and everybody else would fall by the wayside. And then, as I mentioned before, we would have to give up all kinds of information, your own private and personal information, medical information, psychological information, employment, all kinds of things that, generally speaking, we would not want to just willingly turn over to some company. Again, a company that is more concerned with benefiting their shareholders than benefiting the public. So I think that it's fair to say that we should be concerned with to what extent are we really willing to hand over our private information to corporations and government agencies. All that said, I think that we should take serious these issues because it's right around the corner if not already here. And so we shouldn't pretend that we can try to prevent it. Instead, we should think about dealing with it, coping with it, and what sort of ethical issues are at the forefront when addressing the power of generative AI. Those are some of the issues that we'll consider in the next lecture.